Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., civil rights activist and distinguished leader of the African American civil rights movement.
Discrimination and segregation were prominent against races in the United States of America during and prior to the African American civil rights movement. In practically every aspect of American society, whites were given the upper hand and were always dominant over other races with different skin colors. Examples of such imbalanced race included separate areas for non-whites, such as segregated schools, restaurants, movie theaters, stores, water fountains, waiting rooms, and public restrooms. The Plessy v. Ferguson case of 1896 reinforced this idea of racism by declaring racial segregation constitutional under the doctrine separate but equal. Whites in America had better job opportunities and higher incomes, whereas African Americans would struggle to find decent jobs with stable working conditions. Segregation was so widespread, the U.S. government declared it unconstitutional in the Brown v. Board of Education case in 1954. However, segregation still pressed onward.
Times changed dramatically in the years following Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s birth on January 15, 1929 in Atlanta, Georgia. Martin's righteous demeanor was developed both through events that occurred early in his childhood and inspiration from several people. The most influential person in his life was his father, Martin Luther King Sr. The foundation for Martin Luther King Jr.'s loving, strong-willed personality came from his father, as his dad was an advocate for the rights of the black man. Martin Luther King Jr. initially hated white people. However, his opinion of white people drastically changed as his father taught him to love all men. Martin's mother, Alberta Williams King, discussed the social system of racial segregation in which they lived. Alberta told her son that they lived in a society designed to disparage colored people. She constantly stressed the importance of maintaining a sense of self-worth.
Martin Luther King Jr.'s first major success took place during the Montgomery boycott of 1955. This campaign was sparked when civil rights activist Rosa Parks was arrested for adamantly refusing to give up her bus seat to a white man. Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks joined forces in what would end up being a year-long, nonviolent operation. To protest segregation laws pertaining to bus seating, African American citizens were encouraged to not ride the city buses in Montgomery, Alabama. This law-abiding civil protest proved to be successful when in 1956, segregation on city buses was declared unconstitutional by the U.S. Supreme Court. A year later, a Southern Christian Leadership Conference was formed on January 10, 1957, to advance the concept of nonviolent protest as a strategy. Mohandas Gandhi inspired Martin's strong beliefs toward nonviolent protests. This inspiration was enhanced in 1959, when Martin went to visit India to confirm that Gandhi's peaceful approach was effective.
The Southern Christian Leadership Conference, led by Martin Luther King Jr., launched a campaign in 1963 in Birmingham, Alabama, one of the most racially segregated cities at the time. The Birmingham campaign's goals were to eliminate unequal treatment of colored people and to provide the same economic opportunities to African Americans as white people. The SCLC organized various nonviolent protests such as sit-ins, marches in streets with signs promoting change, boycotts, and walks for freedom. People of all ages participated in the protests: college students, teenagers, and even elementary school students. Birmingham police officers took action as they arrested, brutalized, or killed protesters with great frequency. When the Birmingham jailhouses were full, police officials would resort to beating individuals, hosing people down with high-pressure fire hoses, and having vicious dogs attack to prevent protests from continuing. During the mass chaos, Martin Luther King Jr. was arrested as a leader of these various protests. On April 16, 1963, Martin wrote a letter from the Birmingham jail to which he was sent. This letter, containing his rebuttal and the reasoning behind his actions, is known as the Letter from Birmingham Jail.
The March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom was a momentous demonstration in which Martin Luther King Jr. had an essential role. The March on Washington, transpiring on August 28, 1963 in Washington, D.C., was a rally whose purpose was to bring civil and economic equality to African Americans. Comprised of over 200,000 demonstrators, this march was organized by a coalition of organizations and their leaders, including Martin. During this march, Martin gives one of his most influential speeches of all time, known as the I Have a Dream speech.
I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up, live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men...
Martin Luther King Jr.'s passionate rhetoric helped amplify the magnitude of the message he was truly trying to convey to his audience. King's eloquent style of speaking seemed to unite the whole country for one common cause, the equality of all people in the United States of America. This powerful oration, taking place in front of the Lincoln Memorial, is considered by many to be one of the most impactful events in American history.
Although Martin's tragic death occurred at an early age, his indefatigable will remained prevalent in the eyes of the public. His devastating assassination took place on April 4, 1968, when Martin was shot by James Earl Ray on the balcony of the Lorraine Motel in Memphis, Tennessee. Martin Luther King Jr. is easily the most significant activist for the rights of African Americans. King's vehement speeches, meaningful marches, and virtuous personality combined to form the perfect recipe for creating social equality and the complete eradication of racial segregation. He was the long-sought hero for the African American, fighting for the freedoms of colored people. Martin Luther King Jr. persevered through immense adversity, such as house bombings, arrests, etc. King stayed determined to earn the liberty of the black man and encouraged people never to lose faith. He believed that freedom would eventually be theirs to keep if they continued to grapple for it. Martin Luther King Jr.'s persistence paid off as America slowly evolved into the non-segregated society that fulfilled his dream. Through a series of laws and acts passed by the U.S. Supreme Court during and after his lifetime, his prophecies became a reality. One of these major acts was the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which outlawed general discrimination against racial, ethnic, national, and religious minorities. This act ended racial segregation at schools and public facilities. The Voting Rights Act of 1965 ensured that African Americans would have the right to vote. The Civil Rights Act of 1968, approved 7 days after Martin's assassination, granted all Americans equal housing opportunities, regardless of their religious views or racial ethnicity.
Martin Luther King Jr. has undoubtedly established himself as a legendary activist for human rights in the United States of America. He has unquestionably woven himself into the fabric of American history. King revitalized the nation by uniting people of all different nationalities, religions, and races towards the successful extinguishment of the burning flame of segregation and discrimination. This distinguished man is now looked upon as the valiant savior of equal rights in the United States. In fact, Martin was recognized for his incomparable accomplishments by receiving various awards, such as being named Man of the Year by Time magazine in 1963. In addition, he was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 1964 and the Presidential Medal of Freedom. King's greatest honor was to have his birthday proclaimed a national holiday.
Martin Luther King Jr. went from ministering at his local Baptist church to influencing society worldwide. King approached every predicament he encountered with respectfulness, never ceasing to love his enemies and attempting to resolve the issues of racial segregation through civil disobedience. If Martin had not been born, there is a high likelihood that the United States would not be the racially integrated society it is today. An example of this vast contrast between life before and after Martin was the election of the first black president of the United States, Barack Obama. Other famed African American icons of society, such as athletes, singers, and performers, might not have become successful if it wasn't for the results of Martin's actions. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. helped the citizens of America push past an obstacle that prevented the United States from becoming a more prosperous and ethical nation. In the words of Martin Luther King himself, "Every man must decide whether he will walk in the light of creative altruism or the darkness of destructive selfishness. This is the judgment. Life's most persistent and urgent question is, what are you doing for others?"